You don't need to scroll social media for long to notice it. The moment a man makes his single status clear, attention arrives differently than it did 5 years ago. Not slowly, not cautiously, but with an urgency that feels almost desperate. Women who wouldn't have looked twice are suddenly curious. Conversations start faster. Interest escalates quicker. And the questions come earlier than they used to. Not because men suddenly became more attractive, not because dating culture improved, but because something fundamental shifted in how women perceive scarcity, risk, and opportunity in the modern dating market. This is where the pattern begins. Not in romance, but in economics. And economics doesn't care about feelings. It only cares about supply, demand, and perceived value. As someone who's watched this shift happen in real time, I've learned that increased attention rarely means what men think it means. It has little to do with who you are and everything to do with what you represent in a market that's changing faster than most people realize. The shift in attention is driven by three converging forces. First, there's the numbers problem. For the first time in modern history, single men are becoming the scarce resource. Birth rate data shows there are now fewer men in prime relationship age than women seeking them. The ratio has quietly flipped. What was once abundant has become limited. Scarcity alone creates attention, but scarcity combined with awareness creates urgency. Second, there's the quality collapse. The average single man available in the dating market has deteriorated significantly. Porn addiction, gaming obsession, financial stagnation, and social incompetence have become normalized. Women aren't comparing you to other men from 10 years ago. They're comparing you to what's actually available now. If you have basic stability, moderate ambition, and can hold a conversation, you're not average anymore. You're exceptional. That gap in expectations versus reality is creating panic. Third, there's the biological clock meeting economic reality. Women in their late 20s and 30s are waking up to the math. Fertility declines, options narrow, and the men they were waiting for either don't exist or aren't interested in them anymore. The timeline they assumed was flexible has become rigid. Add social media into this equation, and the anxiety compounds. Every algorithm feeds women content about declining fertility, relationship scarcity, and missed opportunities. Every scroll session reinforces the fear that time is running out. This creates a market where demand exceeds supply. And in any market where demand exceeds supply, behavior changes. Patience disappears. Standards adjust. And competition replaces selectivity. But here's the uncomfortable truth most single men miss. This increased attention isn't about you becoming more desirable. It's about you becoming more necessary. You've shifted from optional to urgent, from preference to solution. That doesn't mean every woman approaching you is dishonest, but it does mean interest doesn't automatically equal genuine attraction. Sometimes it just means you're the best available option in a shrinking pool. The real question isn't why you're getting more attention. It's whether that attention is aimed at who you are or at what you can solve for someone running out of time. Once scarcity becomes obvious, strategy quietly replaces spontaneity. For many women, especially those who delayed relationships for career or personal freedom, the approach to single men is less about connection and more about damage control. I've seen this pattern repeat consistently. Aggression framed as confidence, availability framed as interest, and timelines disguised as emotional readiness. It doesn't start with manipulation. It starts with panic about a future that suddenly feels less certain. When the dating pool shrinks visibly and options disappear faster than anticipated, people stop being picky. They start being practical. A single man who isn't broken, bitter, or buried in dysfunction becomes an obvious target. He represents safety from a worse outcome, stability in an unstable market, and a chance to avoid the thing most women fear more than being alone, being left with no choice at all. From the outside, it can look like enthusiasm. From the inside, it's often loss prevention. That fear doesn't always come from greed. Sometimes it comes from watching friends settle for less. Sometimes it comes from realizing the men they rejected years ago are no longer available. Sometimes it comes from genuine loneliness, mixed with biological urgency. The problem isn't the desire for partnership. It's approaching partnership like a closing transaction instead of a developing connection. This is where the line between authentic interest and opportunistic targeting begins to blur. A woman who is emotionally invested wants to understand you. A woman driven by timeline pressure wants to secure you. One explores compatibility. The other pursues commitment. The difference shows up in subtle ways. How quickly exclusivity is mentioned. How often future milestones are implied. How little curiosity exists about your internal world compared to your relationship status. Social narratives reinforce this behavior. Women are told, directly and indirectly, that being strategic is smart, that waiting too long is naive, that hesitation equals losing. The advice isn't find the right person, it's quote one. In that environment, targeting an available single man isn't seen as predatory. It's framed as being realistic. The emotional cost to the man rarely enters the discussion. His autonomy, his pace, and his need to evaluate compatibility are assumed to be negotiable because he should be grateful for the attention. What's rarely acknowledged is how this dynamic reshapes courtship. Affection becomes performance, patience becomes pressure, and disagreement becomes dangerous because it threatens the timeline. Over time, the interaction shifts from mutual discovery to one-sided pursuit, and the man is expected to appreciate the interest without questioning the motive. Understanding this doesn't require cynicism. It requires pattern recognition. Not every woman pursuing single men is operating from fear, but fear-driven interest looks different than desire-driven interest. If you can't tell the difference, you'll commit to someone who doesn't want you. They want what your availability allows them to avoid facing alone. Once single men become visibly scarce, culture amplifies the shift. Availability becomes a status marker. People assume that if you're single and functional, you must be either highly selective or highly desirable. Both perceptions increase interest. Women don't evaluate a single man neutrally anymore. They evaluate him as rare. And rarity triggers competitive instinct before compatibility is even assessed. I've noticed that many women don't ask, is this the right person for me? They ask, can I afford to pass on someone who's available? The fear of regret overrides the need for alignment. Single and stable becomes high value, a term loaded with assumptions that often have nothing to do with your actual character. High value men are treated as limited opportunities. Limited opportunities create urgency. Urgency creates competition. Competition destroys discernment. This is how interest escalates unnaturally fast. Women who would normally take months to warm up are now ready to commit in weeks. Not because the connection is stronger, but because the market feels more competitive. Social proof plays a major role here. When a man is known to be single and pursued by multiple women, he becomes more attractive to others. If others want him, He must be worth wanting. If he's still available, someone needs to act before he's gone. This leads to a dangerous shortcut in perception. Value is assigned before compatibility is tested. Commitment is expected before trust is built. The man becomes a prize to be claimed rather than a person to be understood. This dynamic also encourages performative behavior. Some women learn to present themselves in ways they believe single men want. Rather than showing who they actually are, they show who they think will secure commitment fastest. Agreement becomes automatic. Red flags are ignored. Conflict is postponed. The relationship starts with alignment on outcomes, not honesty about differences. This feels good at first, but collapses under real-world pressure. From the man's perspective, this can be disorienting. Positive attention feels validating, especially after years of being ignored or rejected. But attention based on scarcity is unstable. The moment more men become available, or your circumstances change, the interest shifts. What was attraction becomes comparison. What was pursuit becomes evaluation. What was commitment becomes negotiation. The deeper issue is that culture rewards outcomes over process. Women are praised for securing relationships, not for building compatible ones. As a result, many feel justified in pursuing availability over authenticity. You're expected to be flattered by the attention and grateful for the urgency. Your need for time, space, and genuine connection is treated as unnecessary hesitation. Recognizing this doesn't mean rejecting interest. It means questioning what's driving it. If someone values you primarily because you're single when others aren't, their interest isn't in you. It's in your status as available inventory in a tight market, and inventory gets replaced the moment better options arrive. Once interest is triggered by scarcity, certain patterns repeat. I've seen them often enough to recognize they're not random. They're strategic responses to a competitive environment. Certain behaviors show up again and again when attention is driven by market pressure rather than genuine connection. They're subtle, socially acceptable, and easy to misread as sincerity if you're not paying attention. One of the first signs is manufactured exclusivity. Women position themselves as different from others pursuing you. They emphasize how they're not like the rest, how they see you for who you really are, how other women don't appreciate what they do. This creates artificial intimacy. It feels like being understood, but it's actually a positioning strategy. By framing herself as uniquely compatible, she reduces your willingness to explore other options. You're flattered into narrowing your choices before you've made an actual choice. Speed rarely happens by accident. Another common pattern is timeline anchoring. Future milestones are mentioned early and often. Casual comments about where you'd live together, what kind of wedding she prefers, how many kids feel right. These aren't fantasies, they're psychological commitments. By getting you to imagine a future together before you fully evaluated the present, she creates emotional investment. Backing out later feels like breaking a promise you didn't realize you made. The goal isn't to dream together. It's to lock you into a trajectory before doubt has time to surface. Isolation tactics also appear, though they're framed as intimacy. She wants all your time, discourages you from staying active in social circles, expresses discomfort when you maintain independence. This isn't clinginess, it's market protection. If you're not visible to other women, you can't be pursued by them. If your options aren't apparent, you won't realize you have them. She controls the narrative by controlling your access to alternatives. Another indicator is praise for compliance. You're rewarded emotionally when you move at her pace. when you agree to her timeline, when you prioritize her comfort over your caution. Any hesitation is met with disappointment or withdrawal, not discussion. This creates a subtle but powerful dynamic. Your worth is measured by how quickly you commit, not how thoughtfully you evaluate. Boundaries become evidence of coldness. Patience becomes evidence of disinterest. What makes these tactics effective is that they don't look manipulative. They're wrapped in affection. They align with romantic expectations of closeness and future planning. Questioning them feels like rejecting the relationship itself. That confusion is part of the leverage. Once you're invested in being the good guy, the available guy, the guy who doesn't play games, enforcing boundaries feels like betrayal. The danger isn't in wanting commitment or discussing the future. It's in accelerating those conversations to bypass evaluation. Genuine interest respects your pace. Strategic interest creates pressure to move faster than judgment allows. Men who are used to being passed over often underestimate how vulnerable they are here. Attention feels validating. After years of being ignored, being pursued feels like winning. But pursuit driven by scarcity isn't the same as pursuit driven by desire. If you don't recognize the difference, you'll find yourself committed to someone who needed a solution on a timeline, not a partner they chose after careful consideration. The question isn't whether these tactics exist, it's whether you're willing to notice them before they become the foundation of a relationship you didn't fully choose. Once urgency creates momentum, single men often find themselves in situations that feel like progress, but function like traps. The shift happens gradually, disguised as normal relationship development. This is where many men experience the real cost, not all at once, but through incremental concessions framed as reasonable expectations. The transition is rarely obvious. It's presented as natural progression, mutual investment, or emotional maturity, but underneath, it's a transfer of control disguised as commitment. The most obvious trap involves exclusivity pressure, but it rarely starts with ultimatums. It begins with emotional implications, suggestions that seeing other people means you're not serious, that keeping options open means you don't value her, that hesitation equals disrespect. Each boundary you hold is reframed as a character flaw. Refusing feels selfish. Agreeing feels like proving you care. Over time, protecting your autonomy becomes emotionally expensive. Surrendering it becomes the path of least resistance. Another common trap is accelerated cohabitation. Moving in together is framed as the logical next step, a way to save money, a test of compatibility. But the real motivation is often market security. Once you're living together, your visibility to other women drops to zero. Your routines merge. Your independence erodes. Leaving becomes logistically complicated, not just emotionally difficult. She's not looking for partnership. She's looking for lock-in. There's also the social integration trap, being introduced to family early, blending friend groups quickly, creating shared social obligations before the relationship is stable. This entangles you in systems that make walking away socially costly. If things don't work out, you're not just ending a relationship. You're disappointing her family, disrupting shared friendships, breaking commitments to people who aren't even part of the core relationship. Exit becomes painful from multiple directions. Another trap is emotional debt creation. She positions herself as uniquely supportive during a difficult time in your life, helps you with something meaningful, becomes indispensable during a moment of vulnerability, then reminds you, subtly or directly, of how much she's invested. You feel obligated to reciprocate, not with support, but with commitment. The relationship becomes transactional, but you're the only one who doesn't realize it yet. What makes these traps effective is that they exploit positive qualities. Your desire for commitment becomes vulnerability to pressure. Your appreciation for support becomes susceptibility to obligation. Your respect for relationships becomes tolerance for overreach. The very traits that make you a good partner are used to justify extraction you didn't consent to. And because the progression feels natural, many men don't realize what's happening until resentment builds. The consequences extend beyond lost autonomy. Trust in your own judgment erodes. Self respect takes a hit. You start questioning whether you're being reasonable or whether you're sabotaging something good. Not because you were weak, but because you assumed good faith where strategy was operating. Recovery isn't just about recognizing the trap, it's about understanding why you walked into it. Most men want genuine connection. That desire makes them vulnerable to anyone who knows how to simulate it convincingly. Not every progression is a trap. Not every timeline is manipulation. But patterns matter more than intentions. If commitment is demanded faster than trust can develop, if independence is discouraged more than partnership is built, if your caution is treated as deficiency rather than wisdom, the relationship has already shifted into dangerous territory. The hardest lesson for many single men is this: being wanted isn't the same as being valued. If someone pursues you primarily because you're available when they need someone to be, the foundation is scarcity, not compatibility. And relationships built on scarcity collapse the moment supply increases. From the outside, it seems contradictory. A man who's been single by choice, who has standards and self awareness, should be immune to rushed decisions and strategic targeting. In reality, being single for the right reasons creates its own form of exposure. The very discipline that kept you single often makes you vulnerable to the wrong kind of attention. Long term single men develop specific patterns. Self sufficiency replaces emotional connection. Standards become so clear they feel non negotiable. And isolation, even chosen isolation, creates hunger for validation that's been delayed. When a woman finally shows interest that feels genuine, especially after years of being overlooked or rejected, the contrast is powerful. It feels earned. It feels like proof that waiting was worth it. That emotional reward can override instincts you'd normally trust. There's also the optimism trap. Men who chose to stay single rather than settle believe they can evaluate people accurately. They assume their judgment is reliable because it's been tested. But judgment trained in professional or personal domains doesn't automatically transfer to romance. Emotional manipulation doesn't announce itself, it adapts. And confidence in one area can create blindness in another. Another factor is the loneliness debt. Years of limited intimacy create accumulated need, not for chaos, but for closeness. When someone offers warmth, understanding, and consistent availability, it's easy to mistake relief for compatibility. The need to finally connect can make you overlook incompatibilities you'd normally notice immediately. Single men also face social conditioning that's rarely discussed. There's pressure to not be too picky, to give people chances, to stop overthinking and just commit. Friends and family often celebrate any relationship, regardless of quality, because it means you're finally not alone. That external validation can drown out internal doubt. When everyone's telling you this is good, questioning it feels like self-sabotage. There's also the scarcity awareness working against you. You know the market has shifted. You see that options are limited. You recognize that women pursuing you now might not be available later. That awareness creates its own urgency. If you don't act, someone else will. If you wait too long, the opportunity disappears. This isn't her pressure anymore. It's your own fear of missing out, disguised as decisiveness. Finally, there's the responsibility bias. Single men often take pride in making things work, in solving problems, in being the stable one. When a relationship hits friction early, the instinct is to fix it, not question it. But relationship dynamics aren't projects. They don't respond to effort the same way careers or goals do. Sometimes the smartest move isn't to work harder, it's to recognize incompatibility early and walk away cleanly. Understanding vulnerability isn't about self blame, it's about accuracy. Being selectively single doesn't make you immune to poor relational decisions. If anything, it makes you more vulnerable to someone who knows how to make urgency feel like destiny. Strength in independence doesn't automatically translate to strength in evaluation. If you don't account for that gap, you'll keep encountering the same problems under different faces, wondering how being selective still led to choosing wrong. By the time most men realize something's off, they're already emotionally committed. That's why early recognition matters. Rushed interest doesn't announce itself with obvious red flags. It reveals itself through patterns that feel slightly wrong, but are easy to rationalize. One of the clearest signs is disproportionate intensity. The emotional investment escalates faster than the time you've spent together justifies. Deep feelings are expressed early. Future commitment is implied within weeks. Exclusivity is expected before compatibility is established. When intensity outpaces time, it's rarely passion, it's pressure. Healthy attraction builds with shared experience, not emotional acceleration. Another warning sign is low curiosity about your inner world. Conversations focus on logistics, future plans, and relationship milestones, but rarely on what you actually think, fear, or value deeply. You're praised for what you represent: stable, available, functional, but not explored for who you are. If someone is more interested in your relationship status than your actual perspective on life, they're not choosing you, they're choosing your availability. Timeline fixation is another major indicator. She talks frequently about age, biological clocks, or what she should have done by now. Future milestones are mentioned more often than present experiences. There's an underlying urgency that has nothing to do with how well you're connecting. You're not on her timeline because you're special. You're on it because time is running out. Resistance to your pace also matters. When you suggest slowing down, taking time, or maintaining boundaries, it's met with disappointment, withdrawal, or emotional pressure. Your need for careful evaluation is framed as fear of a commitment or emotional unavailability. Healthy partners respect your pace. Strategic ones treat it as an obstacle. Another sign is competitive framing. She positions herself against other women frequently. References how many men don't appreciate what they have. Implies that you'd be foolish to let her go. This creates artificial scarcity around her while exploiting real scarcity around you. If someone has to remind you constantly that you're lucky to have them, they're not confident in the connection. They're managing your perception. Finally, pay attention to how disagreement is handled. In rushed dynamics, conflict is avoided entirely or treated as catastrophic. You're expected to agree, accommodate, and adjust. Pushback is met with emotional distance or dramatized hurt rather than discussion. Peace is maintained only when you concede. That's not partnership. That's compliance training. These signs don't require paranoia. They require honesty. Increased attention can coexist with poor intentions. Pursuit can exist alongside manipulation. The moment you feel more responsible for maintaining her emotional security than she does, the dynamic has already crossed into dangerous territory. The purpose of awareness isn't to reject connection, it's to prevent urgency from becoming commitment. If something demands more than it gives, if intensity replaces compatibility, if your caution is treated as a flaw rather than wisdom, it's not a relationship to build. It's a warning to heed. The goal isn't isolation, it's precision. A single man who understands his value doesn't need to close himself off from connection. He needs to protect his agency from those who would exploit the current market shift. Protection starts with pace. There is no reward for rushing emotional access. Time reveals intent more reliably than words ever will. If someone is genuinely interested in you, patience won't feel like rejection. If they're driven by urgency, slowing down will expose that immediately. Clear boundaries around timelines are non-negotiable, not because commitment is bad, but because manufactured urgency is dangerous. Moving in, meeting family, or discussing marriage should happen when compatibility is proven, not when someone's timeline demands it. Support your own evaluation process, not someone else's deadline. Watch behavior under limitation more than words during abundance. Pay attention to how someone reacts when they don't get immediate agreement, when you maintain independence, when you say no to progression they want. Respect shows itself when you hold boundaries, not when you surrender them. Someone who values you will adjust to your pace. Someone who values access will apply pressure until you break. Shared values matter more than shared urgency. Attraction fades. Market conditions change. If your discipline, independence, and standards are tolerated rather than respected, the relationship will eventually turn adversarial. You need mutual regard for autonomy and thoughtful decision making, not just agreement on outcomes. Trust your discomfort when it's consistent. Intuition isn't a mystical, it's pattern recognition working faster than conscious analysis. If something feels wrong repeatedly, it probably is. Seeking perspective from people outside the situation can cut through the emotional noise that proximity creates. Most importantly, understand this. Being selective is not cruelty. Walking away from urgency isn't missing out. You're not obligated to solve someone else's timeline anxiety at the cost of your own clarity. The right connection doesn't require you to abandon evaluation to maintain it. Strength isn't just about staying single until you find the right person. It's about protecting your ability to choose freely when attention arrives. When your boundaries are firm, the wrong people remove themselves. And when that happens, you don't lose opportunities. You create space for relationships that are built on compatibility, not desperation. Being single when others aren't doesn't make you lucky. It makes you selective. And selective men don't need more attention. They need better discernment about what that attention actually means.